Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. What's good? Good morning. You know the vibes. Jon Jeune here at the real Jon Jeune _FF. I'm back with another live episode of the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. It is week 14, y'all. In most of your leagues, the final regular season, the final week of the fantasy regular season. So, unless your playoffs started last week, or this week, which would not advise just because of how many teams we have on bye, right? But obviously nothing you can do about it now. You just write a little note to the commission and be like, hey, can we change that? Or your playoffs are like a 2-week playoff, which, again, not great. By the way, or you go into week 18, which is even worse. But anyway, every lineup call has mattered, but it carries a little bit more weight this week. It's going to carry more weight next week and a week after, and until this thing ends in a fantasy championship or heartbreak. So playoff spots, seeding, even tiebreakers on the line this week. So this is where we really look. We got to really lock in, make those smart decisions, man. We got Carolina, New England, the Giants, and San Francisco all on bye this week. So some key players are out of this one. Obviously Christian McCaffrey, Drake May, George Kittle, the Carolina backfield. You got T-Mac now, who's been balling in Carolina. So it's just not great. But obviously, we will cover every remaining game of the Week 14 slate right here. But before we get started, just make sure you check out Patreon, the FFDX Patreon. You can join for free to grab the FFDX cheat sheet, which releases every Tuesday, or can become a supporter for just $1 a month just to unlock the weekly waiver article, expanded rankings, Sunday morning Q&A. Just head over to patreon.com/FFDX. All right, let's lock in. Week 14 waiver show, or Week 14 matchup show starts now. December 5th, guys. December 5th, 7 a.m. Eastern. Week 14. Now, last week, we did 13 games. Actually, no, sorry, we did 16 games because it was Thanksgiving. And last week was about an okay week, right? I think what sucked is that all the misses were big misses. 6 of the 7 misses were big misses. So we had Kareem Hunt finishes the RB 39, Kenneth Walker, the RB 33, Kenneth Gainwell, RB 43, Tyrone Tracy, RB 58. He did leave that game injured. Roma Dunze, wide receiver 82, John Mechie, the wide receiver 58. Although I feel like I gotta take some extra credit for that one because Adonai Mitchell, man, went off. It was the right process, just the wrong receiver. And then Juwan Johnson, who also doubled up as my start of the week, tight end 16. So those are your misses. In terms of the hits, we had some really nice ones, right? We had 9 hits, 5 of them of the big hit variety. Jordan Love finished as the QB2, 25.8 standard quarterback points. Chuba Hubbard finishes the RB5. Bam Knight, the RB14. Zach Ertz, the tight end 3. Jacoby Myers, the wide receiver 11. In terms of some hits, we had Quentin Johnston just barely got there for us, but still had double-digit PPR points. Dalton Schultz continues to be solid, finishes the tight end 9. Harold Fanning Jr. finishes the tight end 12. And then Joe Burrow, I technically have to count him, although don't really feel great about it. I mean, this one was a reverse, right? He came in as the quarterback 8. I was saying I think he finishes lower than that, which he in fact did. The quarterback 11, 19.2 standard for quarterback points. However, Yeah, it just was not like I don't think if you sat Joe Burrow, you weren't like, oh, thank God I sat him. You're like, you know, obviously depending on who you sat him for, right? I think I said I would sat him for Jacoby Brissett, which Jacoby Brissett finishes a quarterback 10, so that's nice. Um, I think I even did I throw Tyrod out there? I think I might have thrown Tyrod ahead of Lamar, but I don't know if I threw him ahead of Joe Burrow. But anyway, that was week 16 or week 14, week 13, third time's a charm. That was week 13. So let's get into week 14. Weather is a little bit interesting this week. Some of the worst games, I think the worst game is probably Cincinnati and Buffalo. There's some snow expected in that game. Um, and then Tennessee, Cleveland looks like there might be some um, freezing rain with some potential snow showers. Indianapolis versus Jacksonville. I mistakenly earlier in the week said that this game was in a dome when I was talking about Trevor Lawrence. It's very clearly not in a dome, so my apologies for that. But this looks like it's going to have some heavy rain. New Orleans and Tampa Bay, there's some rain, but I don't know, something we'll have to be mindful of as we get closer to kickoff. And then Chicago and Green Bay, it doesn't look like there's any precipitation, but it will be cold. So, and the same thing with Houston, Kansas City. So some interesting weather, right? As we get into November, December, the weather starts to fall off a cliff, and some of these games and some of these, depending on these areas, in the Northeast or the Midwest, we'll see some pretty, pretty bad weather. So, all right, let's jump into the matchup show. And as if you are new to this, quarterbacks run tight ends outside the top 10. Running backs, wide receivers outside the top 20. Right. So can either say, hey, bump a guy up and be like, hey, we should be playing this guy, or pump the brakes a little bit on a guy, right? So we haven't had many of the pump the brakes this year, but I'm trying to, I think as this point of the season, mixing them in a little bit more, right? We mixed in Joe Burrow last week, Jake Ferguson the week before. This week is Baltimore quarterback Lamar Jackson facing off against the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's ranked as the expert consensus quarterback 8. Hasn't finished as a QB1 since week 9. Hasn't had 250 passing yards since week 3. Hasn't rushed for more than 48 yards since week 1. The matchup is good, but I'm at this place right now with Lamar where I need to see more, right? I need to see I need to see him do it again, right? Obviously, we know that the player that he is, the player that he's capable of being, he's just not 100% healthy right now, and that's okay. But I need to see him string, 1 or 2 good games together before I'm confidently just throwing him in my lineup, and that's what this is about, right? I'm not saying drop Lamar Jackson. I'm not saying go pick up any Joe Schmo, but we're at this place where we've got to be really considering, all of our options that are available to us when it comes to starting some of these players, and that's Lamar Jackson included, right? So, I said weeks ago you'd be happy if if you had been putting Jacoby Brissett in ahead of Lamar, you would have been happy with the result every single time, right? But people look at their lineups and they're like, I'm not starting this guy over Lamar, which I totally get it. You drafted Lamar high, there's some cost associated with that decision, so I totally get it. But I want to win, right? I'm not here to play guys because of the names, because of what they've done, because they won me a championship 4 years ago. Nah, I'm trying to win. So I need to see more, right? I wrote him up as a sell candidate in the cheat sheet, not this past week, but the week prior. Obviously, trade deadlines have passed in most, if not all, redraft leagues. So when I do those transactions, like I stated in the cheat sheet this week, right? I'm not you probably can't trade, right? But what I mean when I put a guy down like a Lamar Jackson as a sell, what I mean by that is I'm selling the idea, right, that he's a must start QB1, right? So Lamar he's not in that category for me right now. So I get it. The matchup is great. Matchup is great. Pittsburgh allows the 12th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over the last 3 games. I just can't do it right now. All right. That's enough about Lamar. Let's move on to the Washington Commanders traveling to Minnesota to take on the Minnesota Vikings. Chris Rodriguez comes in here ranked as the expert consensus running back 31 in PPR scoring. Has led the team in running back rush share at 53% the last 3 weeks. Leads the running backs on Washington in red zone carries and carries inside the 5-yard line. Minnesota's allowed the 11th most PPR points to opposing running backs. And he might get Jaden Daniels back this week, which would improve, I think, the overall efficiency of the offense. I mean, Marcus Mariota has been playing okay, but I think you feel better about the amount of points that Washington can score, their ability to sustain some drives, right? So, all in all, Chris Rodriguez, I think, is better than the RB31. Right, he's going to continue to see some volume, and if he continues to see that, and the matchup is a good one, then I think RB31 is pretty easy hurdle for him to clear. Other players I consider in this game, Jordan Mason, I like his matchup on the other side. Washington allows the most PPR points to opposing running backs over the last 3 games. Aaron Jones is questionable with that shoulder. I mean, honestly, Jordan Mason was going to be the pick here for me, but it just, Aaron Jones seemed like he was trying to do a Wolverine thing. So that would be, Jordan Mason would be an intriguing option if Aaron Jones sits. I think another question people are going to ask, or people do have, is what are you doing about Jaden Daniels? I don't know if I could play Jaden Daniels. Not right now. I would need to see him healthy. If he plays this week, great. See how he turns out. Minnesota allows the 32nd most fantasy points, so the least amount of fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over the last 3 games. So I don't know if I would even be wanting to play Jaden Daniels in that game, but I would just need to see, like, okay, does he look like himself? Is he limited in any way? Are they holding him back in any way? Um, and like, especially like the re-injury aspect of it as well. So, but I do like the schedule for Jaden Daniels, right? So something to watch as we look towards the fantasy playoffs, but I'm not playing them right now. All right, let's talk about the Indianapolis Colts versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. And a guy I talked about earlier in the week is Jacksonville quarterback Trevor Lawrence, who's the expert consensus quarterback 14. He's been a QB1 in 4 of his last 5 games, including each of the last 3 games. Indianapolis sits here as middle of the road versus the position over their last 3 games, allowing the 18th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. And then there are some potential for some slight weather concerns in this game, so that's something to monitor here. However, I think just given the nature of the week, right, you've got some bye weeks here, with Drake May. I know people, Brock Purdy, people were probably depending on him a little bit. Jackson Dart, that's a big one. Bryce Young has had some streamable weeks, but so either way, we're out 4 quarterbacks this week. Trevor Lawrence just seems like a solid play, just given the nature of the position. And obviously some like weather concerns are like you got like the Buffalo and Cincinnati game. So, that one's supposed to have some snow. So, when we look at some of these other games, I think, when I look at the quarterback position this week, it's relative to the options around us, right? Like in a vacuum, these guys may not be, you know, particularly intriguing, but when you consider the other options that are available to us, it makes them that much more intriguing. All right, let's move on to the next matchup on this list, and it kind of reinforces that point I was just making. We got the Miami Dolphins up against the New York Jets. I'm going with New York Jets quarterback Tyrod Taylor. He's the expert consensus quarterback 19. Finishes the QB5 last week thanks to some rushing upside. Miami allows the 5th most fantasy points to the position over their last 3 games. I obviously wrote up Adonai Mitchell and John Mechie in the cheat sheet. For the first time, I had split lines. That they were sharing a column there in the cheat sheet, and honest to God, you guys asked me like, "Hey, John, who would you play? Adonai Mitchell or John Mechie?" Like, I would go back and forth on it. Like, one day it'd be Mitchell, one day it'd be Mechie. Because they've been legitimately been operating as the 1A, 1B in this offense over the last 3 games. So this forces me to not have to pick one because I can just pick Tyrod, right? I could just pick the syrup. So Tyrod Taylor, we obviously know he has some rushing upside. I talked about Mechie, I talked about Mitchell and how they have a great schedule upcoming. Tyrod has a great schedule upcoming too. So, if you need a guy to stream this week, or if you're in 2 quarterback leagues, like Tyrod Taylor makes a ton of sense. Other guys you could consider in this matchup, obviously, I spoke about Adonai Mitchell and John Mechie. I think Darren Waller's in a good spot this week as well. Mason Taylor's in a good spot as well. Couldn't really find myself to force him into lineups this week, just because I think tight end's actually pretty solid this week. Even given that we don't have George Kittle or a Theo Johnson, if you will, but it's a solid overall. This game is intriguing, right? I think last week I said something about the Jets and Atlanta game, and I was like, I could see this game going over, like not in the 50s, but I think we did hit the 50s though. Yeah, I think I was like somewhere around like 48, 49 with that game. I think we could get something similar here, right? With both these offenses. So I think we can get a similar game to last week with the Jets and the Dolphins here. All right, let's move on to the next game. We got the Cincinnati Bengals taking on the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo. Obviously, we talked about the weather in this game. There's expected to be some heavy snow in this game. And then when that happens, teams tend to lean a little bit more on their run game here. So Cincinnati running back Samaje Perine, he's the expert consensus running back 37. Look, you might be in a league where you got Christian McCaffrey on bye, you have Rico Dowdle on bye, you've got George Kittle on bye, you're holding Brian Robinson because you got Christian McCaffrey and he's on bye. And the only player on your team that's not on bye is Jaden Daniels, who's operating as your backup quarterback behind Daniel Jones. And yes, this is my roster in the League of Extraordinary People. And I don't have anyone to start on my bench. So I picked up Samaje Perine because I needed a running back. And I'm starting him this week. 48% running back rush share in week 13, 16 total touches in week 13. Buffalo allows the 11th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. And like I said, there's a chance of snow in this game, some heavy snow, which would boost potentially the run game here in terms of the amounts of runs that are called and short passing game, things like that. So Samaje Perine has some intrigue here. RB3, I think, is what you would hope for if you're putting him in your lineup. But yeah, that's where I'm at here with this game. Let's move on to the next game. We've got the Seattle Seahawks taking on the Atlanta Falcons, and I went back and forth on this one here as well. I'm going with Seattle wide receiver Cooper Kupp. He's the expert consensus wide receiver 51. Atlanta allows the most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. Cooper Kupp has played 70+% of the snaps and has run 80% of the team routes over his last 3 games with at least a 15% target share in each of those games. So Um, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not excited to play Cooper Cup, but if you're in a deep league and you're looking for a wide receiver 3 type play this week, right? Somebody to stick in your flex. Cooper Cup, I think, has some upside here. When I'm looking at this game, with the Atlanta Falcons, obviously everyone's going to see JSN and, absolutely love Jackson Smith and Jigba. And I think he's in a great spot, but you guys aren't here to listen to me tell you to play Jackson Smith and Jigba. So when I look at the landscape, I look at this, this matchup and the teams, like, I don't want to, I told you I wouldn't tell you that name again. The wide receiver for Atlanta that happens to wear number 1. I'm not saying his name. So, Cooper Cup it was. All right, let's move on to the next game here. We've got the New Orleans Saints versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And let's go with a guy I talked about earlier in the week as well. Talked about him last week as well on the waiver show. But we'll talk New Orleans quarterback Tyler Shuck. He's the expert consensus quarterback 21. Finished as a QB1 in week 13. And he's top 4 in dropbacks per game, top 12 in passing yards per game, and top 6 in design quarterback runs over the last 3 weeks amongst all quarterbacks. And Tampa Bay is allowing the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over their last 3 games. Now, this game flagged for a little bit of weather concerns, but it seems like it should actually be all right here. In terms of Tyler Shuck, right, I mean, I feel like I kind of talked him up a little bit on the waiver show, especially being somebody I was not a fan of. But again, like, I was explaining to somebody, a good friend of mine recently, that, like, yeah, I will look at players from a dynasty perspective, and I'm like determine whether I'm in or I'm out. Um, at cost, of course. And Tyler Shuck is a guy I was out on. I have 0 Tyler Shuck in dynasty leagues, like absolutely 0. And when he was named the starter, I, like, in super flex leagues, I was not rushing to go pick him up. Had no interest. But right now, as we go through redraft, like, none of that really matters to me, right? Like, I don't really care where you were drafted. I don't care about your profile. If you are producing or you have the ability to produce in the fantasy landscape, you will find your way on my redraft roster. And Tyler Shuck is, like, literally the definition of that. Like, I did not like him as a prospect, did not like anything about his situation going. I was picking up all the Spencer Rattler I could just because that's how much I believed in Rattler over Shuck. And I still like Rattler quite a bit. But yeah, Shuck has shown some, interesting, intriguing, ability, since being in the starter, and he's progressed as well. So I almost made him a start of the week. I did something I never do, guys. Like, I wrote him up as my start of the week, put it in the doc and everything, and I was sitting there watching Thursday Night Football, and I was sitting there, I was thinking, and I was like, do I really want to make Tyler Shuck a start of the week? So I pivoted. I know I'm a coward, but anyway, Tyler Shuck, I think he's a solid play this week, especially, again, nature of the quarterback position this week. I mean, he's got a great matchup, but when you, like, compare him relative to the position, it just props him up that much more. All right, let's move on. We got the Tennessee Titans going up against the Cleveland Browns, and a guy I thought I would probably never talk about again, Tennessee running back Tony Pollard. He's the expert consensus running back 35. Now, Cleveland has allowed the 6th most PPR points to opposing running backs over their last 3 games, which, that's interesting because Cleveland has long been this season one of the worst matchups for opposing running backs. Right? There's been one that we've been shying away from. When I look at fantasy points allowed on the season to the position, points per game, Cleveland is 25th most on the season, right? Over the last 3 weeks, they're 6th most. So something's definitely been going on in the last few weeks. Pollard, on the other hand, has no less than 12 opportunities in any game this season. He has a 73.8% running back rush share over the last 3 weeks. So continuing to be involved. This game has a low total, but it has a somewhat close spread. Lines opened up at 3.5 points in the Browns' favor. So it should be a close enough game script that Pollard is still involved as a rusher. Could see, yeah, I mean, if there is touchdowns scored in this game, if there are touchdowns scored in this game, it'll probably be the running back. So anyway, Pollard, solid play as an RB3. Again, just given the week, given the nature of what we're dealing with, you might have to go to Tony Pollard this week. All right, let's move on to the next game here. We got the Denver Broncos against the Las Vegas Raiders. And this is one that I went back and forth about. As Denver wide receiver Troy Franklin, he's the expert consensus wide receiver 29. Now, look, he played his lowest snap share of the season this in week 13 at 52%. He had his lowest route participation rate of this season since week 1, leading to his lowest target total of the season with just 3 targets. Caught 2 of them for 21 yards, but again, just 3 targets. And we saw Pat Bryant have kind of an ascension, if you will, within the rotation here, wide receiver for the Broncos. We saw 7 targets last week after seeing 6 the week before. So it's fair to wonder, like, is this a full-on takeover with Pat Bryant ahead of Troy Franklin, right? And I've gone back and forth about whether Troy Franklin is a solid play or not, but I'm not going to let this 1 week deter me. I'm going to take a shot on him as a wide receiver 3 with some wide receiver 2 upside. Pat Bryant popped up on the injury report with a hamstring injury, which, we got a midweek downgrade, which is never a good thing. So considering all of that, I'm still going to go with Troy Franklin 1 more week against the Las Vegas Raiders, who over their last 3 games have allowed the 7th most PPR points to the position. So that's the primary reason I'm taking the shot, just because of the matchup here. But if it happens again, what happened last week, yeah, I'm out. Totally out. Absolutely out. Now I get it. If you are fighting for a must win, Troy Franklin probably doesn't sit well with you. But I'm taking the shot. So let's move on to the next game here. We got the Chicago Bears against the Green Bay Packers. And let's talk Chicago running back Kyle Monangai. He's the expert consensus running back 22, out-touched Swift 22-19 in week 13, gaining 130 yards while scoring a touchdown. Has been essentially a 50-50 split in touches with Swift over the last 3 weeks. I think the Bears keep this one close, which plays in Monangai's favor. Monangai has popped up on the injury report with an ankle injury, but he was DNP one day and then limited the next. So it might have been just maintenance, but definitely something to watch. But, Monangai being ranked the running back 22, I think I have him ranked as running back 24. So I'm not necessarily like banging the table that he beats the RB22 ranking here, but I think he's definitely startable as an RB2, right? So, the range is probably anywhere from like RB15 to RB28, I would say. And it's a wide range, but I think it's dependent on how this game goes, right? If the Packers blow the doors off the Bears, which, they are 6.5 point home favors, while I don't see that being the likely outcome, if that does happen, then Monangai probably is not as involved in the game plan, right? And you're banking on, a few yards, some yards, and then, hopefully he falls in the end zone there. So, but I think they'd keep it close. Monangai's involved, right? I think, I said earlier in the week, somebody reached out to me, a buddy of mine reached out and was like, hey, Swift or Monangai? And I'm like, my gut instinct is Swift. Like, that's my gut. When I was looking at it last night, it was a little closer than I might have thought, right? Swift has 2 targets to Monangai's 1 target over the last 3 games. So I think that probably scared me a little bit, but Swift has run more routes than Monangai. So if it does get to a place where the Bears are trailing and they have to throw the ball a little bit more, Swift will be on the field in those situations, running those routes and more opportunities to catch the football. All right, let's move on to the next game here. We got the Los Angeles Rams traveling to Arizona to take on the Arizona Cardinals, and another guy. I didn't even have to take him out the show environment here in StreamYard. I just left him right in here because he was ranked the same way last week. And as Arizona running back Bam Knight, he's the expert consensus running back 25. Bam Knight has a 61% running back rush share over the last 3 games. He's 3 straight weeks of double-digit PPR points and a touchdown. The matchup here, the Rams allow the 15th most PPR points to opposing running backs. Now, while the Cardinals are 8.5-point home dogs here, that might lend you to think that Bam Knight probably doesn't do well in this game script, although he's done well in negative game script in weeks past, thanks to scoring touchdowns. But like we said last week, the yardage, the production, minus the touchdown was still very good. Obviously, we saw what the Panthers were able to do on the ground to the Rams. I don't think that happens again this week, but I think Bam Knight's going to be involved, continue to see double-digit touchdowns, possibly get in the end zone. I also do like Michael Carter quite a bit this week. I didn't write him up, but he's another player I did consider just because I know the nature of the running back position. People do need help. And Michael Carter's a guy that I think, has been utilized the last couple of weeks. Pretty sure he had double-digit touches last week, mostly being involved as a pass catcher out the backfield. So I think there's some opportunities here for him, especially Cardinals being 8.5-point dogs. And back to Bam Knight, man. I mean, look, I've been saying, hey, we got to pick up Trey Benson. And it's been about the schedule, right? You get Cincinnati week 17. You feel really good about that. But if Trey Benson doesn't come back, right? And I'm very curious to see what happens because he was a DMP this pretty much this whole week, right? And they've got 6 days left to activate Trey Benson. Correct. They opened up the practice window, then the activation period on him. So basically what that means is he's got 21 days. They've got 21 days from the time of that activation window being opened to activate him to the active roster. And if they don't, he reverts back to IR, but this time it's the season-ending IR. So he started when they opened up the practice window. He was practicing. He never came back. He hasn't practiced. Don't think he practiced. He didn't practice all week this week. I'm pretty sure he didn't practice all week last week, or I don't know what the situation. I forget what the situation was there. But they're coming into a situation where they're going to have to make a decision, and I don't think you can sign him to the active roster just without having seen him practice. So there's a real possibility he goes right back to the IR. And if that happens, Bam Knight, who's basically free, right? I mean, I look at this now, but I know when we did the waiver show earlier in the week, like he was available in 75% of Yahoo leagues, right? Like I feel like a dummy because he's a guy that I had in multiple leagues, and I dropped him because I'm like, oh, Trey Benson's going to come back. I think the Rams were on bye. Yeah. Bam Knight is still available in 69% of Yahoo leagues. So I guess the Rams this week, Houston next week. Houston, not a great matchup. But then after that, he gets Atlanta in week 16, and then he gets Cincinnati week 17. So Bam Knight, man. Bam Knight. All right, let's move on. Let's talk Sunday Night Football. Let's talk Houston Texans versus the Kansas City Chiefs. And let's talk Houston wide receiver Jaden Higgins. He's the expert consensus wide receiver 35. Higgins has scored double-digit PPR points in 3 of his last 4 games, second amongst Texans wide receivers in terms of snaps, routes, and targets. Over the last several weeks, Kansas City allows the 5th most PPR points to the position. The more and more I talked about Jaden Higgins, but I'm gonna move a little bit. But the more and more I looked at this matchup, I looked at the players in this matchup, right? Like I like Jaden Higgins quite a bit. I like Nico Collins a lot. I like Dalton Schultz. Kansas City allows the 11th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over the last 3 games. CJ Stroud is like very intriguing in this matchup. I think the least intriguing thing about CJ Stroud in this matchup is the Houston defense. I think that's the least intriguing thing about CJ Stroud in this matchup. Because typically you'd think, all right, well, Kansas City seems like a good matchup for a quarterback and his weapons. You got Patrick Mahomes on the other side. You're gonna have to score some points. But if Houston's defense can stymie Mahomes a little bit and keep this game low scoring, then CJ Stroud's not asked to do so much. But Sunday Night Football, Chiefs are at home. They're 3.5-point favorites. Implied total of 23 points for the Chiefs. I think there's a world here where CJ Stroud, because at the start of the week, I'll be honest, guys, I was going back and forth between Tyrod and CJ Stroud, which I'm like, yo, I thought I'd never do that. But I was going back and forth between Tyrod and CJ Stroud. And I was like, all right, Tyrod. And I was like digging into this some more. I'm like, CJ Stroud is in a really good spot. I mean, his weapons are in a really good spot. Right. So it's something to consider. Definitely something to consider. And the game, I think the game environment plays a key here too. Right. Like, which game would you pick to go over? Miami Jets or Kansas City Houston? Yeah. So that's one of the ones I'm going back and forth on in my own head on my own teams. So I guess it tells you how I feel about Tyrod. But CJ Stroud in a really good spot as well here. So definitely a guy I would consider. All right, let's move on. Let's go to this next game, the last game of the week, Monday Night Football, the Philadelphia Eagles against the LA Chargers. I'm going Kamani Vidal of the LA Chargers. He's the expert consensus running back 28, right? So Amarion Hampton, he may return this week. Not really sure what's going on there. I mean, it's tough with the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh. Like it's possible to get anything out of him, feels like. But Hampton could return this week, could not, right? But I think I would still expect Vidal to be involved in this rushing attack. If you remember early on in the season, Najee Harris was coming back from his eye injury. Hampton was getting most of, if not all of the work. Then as Najee Harris started to become healthy, they put him in, and it was kind of like annoying for Hampton managers because it was like, well, we got Hampton and, Najee Harris keeps coming in, taking this work. And then Najee Harris, he got hurt. He was out for the year, and then it was just Omarion Hampton from there, right? It was all in on Omarion Hampton. And it seemed like they tried to go to a committee between Vidal and Haskins, but then it was all Vidal. So I say all that to say, I think they want a committee. Right? But I think they're also okay with just if a guy shows he's got it, they're just gonna ride that guy, right? So Vidal, RB28, got Hampton coming back. I know people are probably like, damn, what do I do? Do I start Vidal? Do I not? I think with Herbert possibly being limited here with the hand injury, maybe they don't want to expose him to too many hits in the passing game. Eagles will be without Jalen Carter on the D line. Philadelphia allows the 5th most PPR points to opposing running backs. It just kind of sets up where, like, if Amarion Hampton doesn't play, Vidal is like obviously the massive ceiling. But I also think, just like given all the context within this game, Vidal probably still has a solid floor, right? So RB28, I think, is very doable. So I think he brings some RB2 value here this week. So I say all that to say I'm playing Vidal in leagues where I have him. In leagues where I have him and Hampton, play Hampton. All right, let's move on to this week 14 starts of the week. Last week, Jacoby Brissett finishes the quarterback 10, so that was solid. We'll take that. Breece Hall finishes the RB 17. That one, yeah, I guess you could live with it, right? I still had a solid PPR day, scored a touchdown, so solid. Troy Franklin, wide receiver 74, obviously, we talked about that, lowest snap share, lowest target share, lowest route participation rate. So it was just absolute nightmare coming out of the bye. So never would have seen that coming. And then Juwan Johnson finishes the tight end 16, which obviously just not what we hoped for there. So moving on, we're going to chug along and have a good week in week 14. So, starting with the quarterback start of the week, let's go LA Rams quarterback Matthew Stafford. He's the QB6 on the season, having scored 20-plus fantasy points in 50% of his games this season. And when you remove rushing stats, Stafford leads all quarterbacks in fantasy points per dropback. He's one of the few guys this weekend that's playing in a dome, so free from the weather. His team is tied for the highest implied team total on the week, and he's got an Arizona defense that's allowing the 10th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over their last 3 games. So Matthew Stafford in a great spot, probably has top 5 upside this week, maybe even higher than that. Again, when you look at the landscape of the position, Stafford in a fantastic spot. Moving on to my running back start of the week, let's talk Cincinnati running back Chase Brown. Since week 8, Brown hasn't finished worse than the RB13 in PPR scoring. Also since that time, he's the RB6 in PPR points per game, and now he's getting a Buffalo defense allowing the 11th most PPR points to the position over their last 3 games. We talked about Samaje Perine being a solid play. Still think that's fine. Doesn't impact Chase Brown. Obviously, we talked about this potential snow in this game. I think that's going to be good for Chase Brown. And, we're also continuing to monitor the status of T. Higgins, which if he's out, Chase Brown continues to see some work in the passing game, especially that short passing game here as well. So definitely a good spot here for Chase Brown. All right, let's move on to the wide receiver position. And my wide receiver start of the week is Arizona wide receiver Michael Wilson going up against the LA Rams. Wilson has been the RB6 in PPR points per game the last 3 weeks. 2 of those spiked weeks came with Marvin Harrison Jr. out of the lineup when he saw back-to-back weeks of a 30+% target share. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is out again this week. Right. And the Rams have allowed the 13th most PPR points to opposing wide receivers over their last 3 games. So this sets up as a great spot for Michael Wilson. Again, I could have very well gone with my guy here, Jacoby Brissett, as the start of the week. But there's just something about picking a guy 3 weeks in a row to be a start of the week. Plus, if you're listening, I'm hoping that you are on the bandwagon here with Jacoby Brissett because we've been talking about this guy for a minute now. So this is my way of being able to get some shares here. Jacoby Brissett, who's rostered now is 65% of Yahoo leagues, so still available in 35% of Yahoo leagues. So gotta get that up, man. Right? I mean, gets Atlanta week 16, Cincinnati week 17. I'm just saying. So, anyway, Michael Wilson, great spot here this week. Start him up. And for my tight end start of the week, went back and forth on this one, but I'm going with Houston tight end Dalton Schultz versus Kansas City. He's scored double-digit PPR points in 6 of his last 8 games. He's been extremely steady on the season with 5 tight end 1 finishes over his last 7 games. And now he gets a Kansas City defense that's allowing the 13th most PPR points to opposing tight ends over their last 3 games. So good spot for Dalton Schultz. I feel like we talk about him every week in the matchup show. We talk about him on the waiver show. So this is my way of stamping some a stamp of confidence here on Dalton Schultz. So that's gonna do it, y'all, for Week 14 matchup show. This is it. Last week before the fantasy playoffs. So every start, every sit, every flex spot matters. Trust your process. Play those matchups. Set yourself up to make that playoff run. If you found today's show helpful, make sure you go ahead, you like the video, subscribe, turn on those notifications so you don't miss a show, right? We're coming back Tuesday with the waiver show, the first waiver show of the fantasy playoffs. Whew. All right. Yeah. So also, don't forget Patreon, FFDX. Patreon.com/FFDX, where you get the FFDX cheat sheet, 100% free. You also could sign up for the supporter tier for just $1 a month, where you get the weekly waiver wire article, expanded rankings, and access to the Sunday Q&A. All right, so go ahead, come join the community. We're building it, so definitely don't want to miss out. So appreciate y'all for tuning in this morning. Good luck in your Week 14 matchups. Go get those playoff spots, and I'll catch y'all next week. Good luck. Peace.